Being alone in the isolated house always brought me a sense of peace. The absolute silence, the open fields, and the sound of the wind made me feel safe, as if nothing could reach me there. But that night, something felt different. It was as if the silence itself was watching me, waiting for the right moment to reveal something terrifying. I tried to ignore the feeling as I busied myself with simple tasks inside the house. Everything seemed normal until I heard a faint, almost imperceptible sound coming from somewhere upstairs. At first, I thought it was just the old wood creaking, but the noise was rhythmic, as if something, or someone, was moving. My heart raced, but I forced myself to keep going. Surely, I was just imagining things. But as the minutes passed, it became clear that it wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me. The sound grew louder, and reality hit me like a punch. The front door was unlocked. Fear took over as I tried to decide what to do. What once was a welcoming home now felt like a trap with no escape. The metallic sound from the shed outside shattered any hope that I was imagining things. I went to the window and saw the door swaying open, though I was certain I had locked it earlier. The sight made my stomach drop. The wind pushing the door seemed to carry something else, something unseen but deeply unsettling. I grabbed a flashlight and a wrench, trying to convince myself it was just a mistake. Every step toward the shed felt heavier than the last. When I finally arrived, the place was a mess. Tools were scattered on the ground, and strange marks on the door suggested someone had been there. I ran back to the house and locked every door behind me. But the feeling of safety was long gone. I sat on the couch, staring at the window, waiting for something, anything, to happen. The thought of being so isolated, with no help nearby, made everything even more terrifying. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. I locked myself in the bathroom, the only door in the house with a solid lock, clutching the rifle in my trembling hands. I tried calling my dad, but he didn't pick up. Each unanswered call only added to the growing sense of despair. I needed help, but it felt like the outside world was out of reach. After several failed attempts, I called the police. My voice shook as I described the situation, but knowing someone was on their way gave me a small glimmer of hope. As I waited, every noise in the house seemed magnified, the creaking wood, the wind against the windows, even my own breathing. I kept the rifle aimed at the bathroom door, but the thought of actually using it terrified me. The silence outside was deafening, and each passing second felt like an eternity. I was alone, vulnerable, and all I could do was hope the police would arrive in time. Back inside, I tried to convince myself that I was safe. But then I heard it, footsteps upstairs. My courage evaporated instantly. The sound was unmistakable, deliberate, cautious steps, as if someone was exploring the space. I knew no one else was supposed to be there. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I grabbed the rifle I kept for emergencies and tried to steady my breathing. Climbing the stairs felt impossible, but staying put seemed just as dangerous. Each step upstairs grew louder, closer, as if the intruder was intentionally moving toward me. And then the sound stopped. The silence that followed was even more horrifying. I knew they were up there, knew something was about to happen. Every shadow in the house seemed larger, more menacing, and I couldn't think of a way out. All I could do was wait, but the fear of being alone and defenseless consumed me. Then it happened. The knocks on the bathroom door were soft, but each one felt like a hammer to my chest. Before I could react, I heard his voice. It was low, almost gentle, but there was something deeply wrong about it. "You left the door open, as if you were expecting me." Those words froze me in place. He knew I was here, knew I was defenseless. I shouted that the police were on their way, trying to sound confident, but my voice trembled. The doorknob turned slowly, but the door stayed shut. Then, a piece of paper slid under the door. My hands shook as I picked it up and read the words scrawled in uneven handwriting, "You can't hide from me." When the police finally arrived, the house was empty. The intruder had vanished without a trace, but the note was proof enough that it wasn't just a nightmare. It was real. Since that night, I've never been able to sleep peacefully again. Even now, I feel like I'm being watched, waiting for the moment he decides to return and finish what he started. It was supposed to be just a quick stop at the gas station, but something about that man unsettled me. He was standing next to his Jeep Cherokee, watching me as I fueled up. I tried to ignore him, avoiding eye contact, but it was impossible not to feel the weight of his gaze. His eyes were cold, analytical, as if he were planning something. As soon as I finished, I rushed into my car. The silence of the engine starting was a brief relief until I saw the Jeep Cherokee in my rearview mirror. He was following me. This wasn't a coincidence. He mirrored every turn I made, keeping a precise distance. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, and every mile felt like an eternity. When I finally arrived home, I sped through the gate, closed it quickly, and ran inside. From the window, I saw the Jeep pass slowly in front of my house, as if he were memorizing every detail. My heart was pounding so hard it seemed to echo through the room. At that moment, I knew the terror had just begun. The first nights were the worst. I was already on edge after the gas station incident, but nothing could have prepared me for the whispering voice calling my name outside. It was low, almost a murmur, as if he was waiting for me to open the door. "Isabella," the voice cut through the night silence, chilling me to the core. I ran to the windows, shutting every curtain and locking every door. The darkness outside was too thick to see anything, but I knew he was there. The worst part wasn't hearing the voice, it was knowing he knew my name. How did he find that out? This wasn't just stalking, it was personal, calculated. On the second night, he returned. "Isabella," hearing my name being called in the dark made my heart nearly stop. It was like he wanted to drive me insane, to remind me he was out there, in control. The feeling of being alone and completely vulnerable was overwhelming. After 3 nights of terror, I finally called the police. My hands were shaking as I explained everything: the man in the Jeep, the voices, the shadows that seemed to move around the house. The officers were kind and came to the property, but they found nothing except the silence of the fields and the still trees. They assured me I was safe, that I was probably imagining things. But how could I explain those voices? How could I ignore the feeling of being watched at every step? While the officers spoke to me, I caught a glimpse of something, just a shadow, between the trees. I almost screamed, but when I pointed, it was already gone. After they left, I stood there, in the silence of the empty house, knowing he would return. I wasn't safe. Fear had become my constant companion, and the only thing left was to prepare for whatever came next. That night, I decided to leave. I called my friend and planned to stay at her house. I grabbed my bag and keys in a rush, but the moment I stepped outside, he appeared. Like a figure from the shadows, the man ran toward my car. My blood turned to ice as he yanked the door handle, pulling it hard. "Open the door," he screamed, his fists pounding on the glass. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key in the ignition. He hit the window so hard I heard it crack, and pure terror coursed through me. I stomped on the gas pedal while the car engine roared to life, desperate to escape. When I finally sped away, I saw him in the rearview mirror, standing in the middle of the road, staring at me as I disappeared. The image of him illuminated by my car's taillights will haunt me forever. I arrived at my friend's house in shock. Trembling, I pounded on the door until she opened it. Once inside, I collapsed onto the couch. I told her everything: the Jeep, the voices, the attack. Her family immediately called the police again, and this time the officers promised to patrol my house more frequently. They said he likely wouldn't come back, but how could they be sure? Even at my friend's house, the fear lingered. Every noise, every shadow outside the window made me jump. That man wasn't just any stalker, He knew where I lived, he knew my name, and he knew how to terrify me. What did he want? Why did he choose me? These questions echoed endlessly in my mind. Days later, I returned home with the promise that I would be safer now. But nothing felt the same. Fear had settled in every room, in every creak of the wind against the walls. Even with the doors locked, I knew he could come back. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still hear my name being whispered, like an echo of the terror I lived through, and the fear that it's not over yet. It was supposed to be just another ordinary night. The house was silent, except for the hum of my computer as I played StarCraft in my room. I had the entire house to myself, something I usually enjoyed, but that night felt oddly still. The only light came from my monitor, casting pale blue shadows on the walls. Then, the doorbell rang. At first, I thought I imagined it, mistaking the sound for something in the game. When the doorbell rang again, more insistent this time, I froze. Who would show up at this hour? I hesitated before heading to the door. Peeking through the peephole, I saw her, a woman standing under the dim porch light. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes wrinkled, and her expression unnerving, equal parts desperate and blank. "Please, can I use your phone?" she said faintly, her voice barely reaching through the door. Something didn't sit right. Her presence made me uneasy, like she didn't belong there. I shook my head and told her no, watching as she stared at the door for a few seconds before walking away. I went back to my room, but the tension lingered. I couldn't focus on the game anymore. Somehow, I knew it wasn't over. I had just settled back into my chair when it started again. First, a soft tapping, just light enough to be ignored. But the sound grew louder, more insistent, as if someone were hitting the glass with something heavy. My chest tightened, and I instinctively turned toward the window. Pushing the curtain aside ever so slightly, I froze. She was back. This time, she stood at my window, tapping the glass with something metallic, a pipe, a crowbar. I couldn't tell. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and her expression no longer pleading. It was cold, unnerving. My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled back from the window, my mind racing. Why was she still here? What did she want? I crept to the front door, checking the locks again. The pounding on the glass didn't stop. Each thud echoed through the quiet house, as if daring me to react. Just when I thought it was over, I heard heavy footsteps around the house, moving methodically, as if someone were circling the perimeter. My gut told me that something very wrong was happening, and I wasn't safe. The next sound was even worse, a deep, calm voice. A man's voice. "Hey, it's okay. My name is Lucas. My mom needs to use the phone," he said, standing at the front door. Peering through the peephole, I saw him, tall, wearing a cap pulled low over his face. The woman stood a few steps behind him, still unmoving, her head tilted slightly as if she were watching me. Everything about them felt off. His tone was too measured, too controlled, and the story didn't add up. "We just need to come inside for a minute," he added after I told him the police were on their way. For a second, he was quiet, then he said it again, this time more insistent. "We just need to come inside." My legs felt weak, but I didn't move. I knew I couldn't open the door. My instincts screamed at me that this was no ordinary situation, and these weren't just lost people. When I didn't answer, they disappeared into the shadows. But I wasn't relieved. I felt like I was being watched, as if they were waiting for me to let my guard down. The quiet didn't last. The tapping sound returned, only louder, sharper, like metal scraping against the glass. I turned slowly toward the window and froze in place. The woman was back, her face inches from the glass, smiling, a smile that didn't belong on any human face. She raised her hand, and in it was a knife. She tapped the blade against the glass, her movements slow, deliberate, as though mocking me. "Open up," she whispered, her voice just audible through the window. My heart raced, and I scrambled backward, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The glass shook with each tap. I couldn't look away. That smile, wide and unnatural, seemed to pull me in, like a dark void. I sank to the floor, hidden behind my bed, praying the window would hold. Then I saw him. The man was standing further back in the shadows, watching her, watching me. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, silent and still, like a statue. It was worse than the woman. It was as though he was waiting, calculating. I couldn't stop shaking. My mind was spinning, and all I could think was, how do I survive this night? Eventually, the tapping stopped, and silence took its place. But I didn't move. I sat there, curled up in a corner of my room, too afraid to breathe. The first rays of sunlight finally crept through the window, casting the room in a pale, golden glow. I hesitated before peeking outside. There was no one there. It was like they'd disappeared into thin air, leaving only the deep scratches on the glass as proof that they'd been real. When my parents returned, I told them everything. They called the police, and an officer came to check the house and yard. But there was nothing to be found, no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. It was as though the night had swallowed them whole, leaving me with only the terror they brought. To this day, I don't know who they were or what they wanted. But I can't forget that smile. On some nights, when the house is quiet and shadows creep across the walls, I catch myself staring at the window, half expecting to see her face again. Maybe it was a random incident, or maybe it wasn't. All I know is the fear they left behind never really goes away.